Tonight, we follow a path so carefully concealed it has survived centuries without a single word spoken aloud. A network of symbols, carvings, and hidden corridors whisper a story of power, faith, and guardianship that was never meant to be revealed. Across the windswept hills of Scotland, from Rosslyn to Kirkwall, from Melrose to secret coastal inlets, the Templars left traces not of gold or treasure, but of knowledge and bloodlines preserved under shadow. Every stone, every spiral, every bee, carved into wood or stitched into fabric, carries a message, a legacy protected against kings, popes, and time itself. This isn't just about old ruins or forgotten scrolls. It's about a secret that survived betrayal, persecution, and war. A story of families, of masons, of knights, and of a hidden lineage that shaped the land and the people who walked it. And those who tried to erase it, they left clues in plain sight, encoded in architecture, heraldry, and ritual, waiting for the right eyes to see. So, before you dismiss this as legend or myth, ask yourself, what if the truth has been under your feet all along? What if the story of the Templars, their knowledge, and their guardianship is still alive, quietly shaping the world? Like the video, subscribe, because tonight we uncover the Templars' secret legacy in Scotland, and some truths were never meant to be forgotten. Beneath the rolling green hills of southern Scotland, where the wind sighs through wild heather and ancient stones lean like weary sentinels, a whisper lingers. It is a whisper of knights who vanished in fire and shadow, of ships that slipped away into fog, and of secrets that never truly sank. History tells us the story ended in France, on a Friday in October of the year 1307, when the Knights Templar were hunted, branded heretics, and burned at the stake. But history lies by omission. The real story did not end in flames, it crossed the sea. Listen closely, and you might still hear the echo of hooves on wet earth, the low creak of a hidden ship setting sail from La Rochelle, its cargo not gold or relics, but something far more dangerous. Knowledge, a legacy, the kind of truth that outlives the men who die for it. In the lowlands, among ruins half swallowed by moss and mist, the air feels heavy, as if the land itself remembers. The fields stretch wide and lonely, yet beneath them run layers of forgotten stone, carved with symbols that never belonged to Scotland's clans or its church. Circles, crosses, serpents. The markings of a brotherhood that refused to die. It's said the Templars came here not as conquerors, but as ghosts seeking sanctuary. After their order was crushed in France, they fled north where papal power thinned and the crown of Scotland was desperate for allies. Robert the Bruce, excommunicated and defiant, offered them refuge. They offered him knights. An unspoken pact was born. But if they came here, where did they go? There are records that hint at hidden commanderies near the village of Temple, once called Ballantrodoc, where a river bends and old stones bear the red cross even now. Locals speak of tunnels that open only in moonlight, of chants heard through soil, and of torches flickering in abandoned vaults. Every few years, a farmer unearths something strange, a sword hilt too fine for a soldier, a coin that shouldn't exist, a grave facing east instead of west. The church calls it coincidence. The curious call it proof. The truth might be neither. Scotland was a perfect refuge. Its land was wild, its people proud, and its silence deep. The Templars could vanish here without ever leaving. They could build again in secret, shaping symbols into the heart of churches, carving their codes into doorframes, teaching their craft to masons who would one day pass it on beneath a different name. Some say their greatest secret was not hidden treasure, but hidden transformation. They did not die, they adapted. They changed their shape and lived on in the architecture, the rituals, and the geometry of faith itself. So when you walk through a Scottish glen at dusk and feel that sudden chill, that breath against the back of your neck, remember, the land remembers. The whisper beneath the heather is not just wind. It is history exhaling, waiting for someone brave enough to listen. Paris, in the cold autumn of the year 1307, smelled of smoke and betrayal. The air was thick with the cries of men who had once worn white mantles marked by a red cross, now stripped, chained, and branded as heretics. The Templars had stood as the armoured arm of Christendom, feared and respected, protectors of pilgrims, keepers of secrets. But power breeds envy, and gold breeds accusation. Under the command of King Philip the Fair, torches lit the night as the order was erased by decree, its knights dragged from commanderies, their treasures seized, their names cursed. Yet not all were captured. Somewhere, between the smoke of Paris and the salt wind of the Atlantic, a plan unfolded in silence. La Rochelle, the Templar port on the western coast of France, became the stage of a quiet exodus. Witnesses would later whisper of ships that vanished into fog without leaving a trace. Records show vessels belonging to the order disappearing just days before the arrests. Where they went was never written. Some said they fled south to Portugal. Others claimed they sailed to the Baltic. But among the sailors and merchants of the coast, the oldest rumour spoke of a northern course, toward the misted isles of Scotland. In those dark waters, a flotilla moved like ghosts. The ships were small and fast, their sails painted with no cross, their holds carrying not gold, but something far more guarded. Relics, scrolls, charters, perhaps the very heart of the order's knowledge. Each knight aboard knew they were leaving behind the world that named them, but they carried its memory like fire hidden in ash. Northward they went, following the pull of the pole star, guided by the promise of safety beneath unfamiliar skies. Scotland, at that time, stood apart from Rome's control. King Robert the Bruce, excommunicated yet undefeated, ruled a land wounded by war but proud in defiance. He needed warriors unbound by papal law, and the Templars needed a home where inquisitors would not reach. The sea between France and Scotland was unforgiving, its storms sudden and merciless. But those who survived would find haven in hidden coves and coastal monasteries that owed loyalty not to Rome, but to the Scottish crown. The legend says they came ashore under moonlight, cloaked, silent, bearing crates, sealed with the wax of their order. Locals saw men dressed in plain cloth, yet carrying themselves with the discipline of knights. They asked no questions, and the strangers offered no answers. In time, the ships were gone, the records burned, the names forgotten, yet something of that voyage lingers in the salt air of the North Sea, in the ruins that line its coasts, and in the quiet confidence of a people who have always kept one secret too many. History wrote that the Templars died in France, but sometimes the truth does not burn, it sails. The Sinclair family name drifts through Scottish history like mist through the glen, always near the heart of something mysterious, never fully grasped. Their story begins long before Rosslyn Chapel rose from stone, reaching back to a time when loyalty and legend were one. Descended from Norman knights, the St. Clairs crossed the sea to Scotland in the 12th century, earning favour with kings and the trust of the church. But what set them apart was not their bloodline or their power. It was what they protected. In the shadow of Edinburgh, on land wrapped in quiet hills and rolling fog, the Sinclairs built Rosslyn. It was not meant as a monument to wealth, but as a sanctuary. Every arch and column was designed with intent, each carving whispering a secret only the initiated could read. There is something strange about Rosslyn, something that feels older than the stones that hold it. Beneath its chapel lies a vault that has never been opened, sealed since the 15th century, its contents guarded by silence. Some say it holds the bones of knights who fled from France in 1307. Others believe it hides scrolls or relics carried across the sea in the Templar ships that disappeared from La Rochelle. The Sinclairs never confirmed anything, yet they never denied it either. They understood that mystery is power and silence is protection. Legends claim that William Sinclair, who began construction on Rosslyn Chapel in 1446, was more than a nobleman. He was a student of sacred geometry, an architect of symbols. His designs mirror the hidden mathematics of ancient temples and the cryptic language of the Templars themselves. It is said he inherited more than land from his ancestors. He inherited their charge. The Sinclairs were known to shelter men on the run from both king and church. Records speak of foreign visitors who arrived unannounced, stayed a while in the valley, and vanished without trace. Pilgrims, scholars, soldiers of a forgotten cause. In a world where knowledge could get you killed, Rosslyn became a library made of stone. To this day, the chapel holds carvings of maize and aloe, plants unknown in Europe before the discovery of the New World. How could they be there? Perhaps they were symbols of a hidden voyage. Perhaps they were clues left for those who knew where to look. The Sinclairs never explained, and time made sure the questions outnumbered the answers. They lived as guardians, not preachers. When asked about the Templars, their descendants smiled politely and changed the subject, but in their archives, their symbols, and their bloodline, something remains. The Sinclairs did not boast of their heritage because they did not need to. Rosslyn speaks for them. It hums with a quiet intelligence, a message carved into every surface, waiting for someone patient enough to read it. In Scotland's history, there are families that ruled and families that built. The Sinclairs did both, but more importantly, they remembered. Rosslyn Chapel is not a church. It is a code written in stone. Step inside, and the air changes. Dust glows like gold in the light that filters through stained glass. And every inch of wall and pillar seems alive. Angels, vines, stars, and strange patterns twist around each other, their meaning hidden beneath centuries of interpretation. To most visitors, Rosslyn is beautiful, even haunting. But to those who look closer, it feels deliberate, as if someone carved an idea rather than a decoration. Built in 1446 under the guidance of William Sinclair, Rosslyn defies its time. Its carvings mix Christian imagery with symbols that do not belong to the church at all. There are green men sprouting leaves from their mouths, dragons swallowing themselves, and twin serpents coiled like strands of DNA long before such knowledge existed. In the arches above the nave, rows of small cubes are carved with geometric markings. For centuries, no one knew their purpose. Then, in the early 2000s, researchers noticed that the shapes resembled sound waves. When translated, they formed a musical score, a song hidden in the chapel itself, stone that sings. Architecture that remembers. It is said the Templars built their chapels to reflect divine proportion, believing that mathematics was the true language of God. Rosslyn continues that tradition, but expands it, blending sacred geometry with ancient myth and natural science. Every pillar and window aligns to an invisible harmony, like a frozen symphony. The most famous carving is the apprentice pillar, a spiraling column said to have been designed by a young mason who died for his genius. Its pattern mirrors the shape of a plant known as the dragon vine, a symbol of life and eternity. The story says the master mason killed his apprentice out of jealousy, but some think it was a metaphor, a warning about knowledge that outgrows control. The chapel also contains carvings of corn and aloe, plants native to the Americas, yet depicted here decades before Columbus sailed west. Skeptics call it coincidence. Others see it as proof that those who built Rosslyn knew of lands across the sea long before official history admits. There are also hidden faces, hands clasped in prayer, that peek from the shadows of arches, and angels playing instruments never seen in medieval art. Each element feels like a piece of a puzzle, and together they create a message too complex for one lifetime to decode. Beneath the chapel lies a sealed vault, rumoured to hold relics, scrolls, or perhaps the remains of Templar knights who fled from France in 1307. No one has been allowed to open it. The Sinclair family has kept that promise for centuries. Some say it is out of reverence, others say it is out of fear. Whatever sleeps beneath Rosslyn has shaped its legend more than the carvings above. Because this place is not just a chapel, it is a library written in light and shadow, and like all libraries built on secrets, it waits for the right reader. Beneath Rosslyn Chapel lies a silence so deep it feels alive. Locals call it the vault that will not open, a sealed chamber hidden under centuries of stone, legend, and lore. For more than 500 years, it has waited, untouched, guarded not by swords or locks but by rules. Legal ones, spiritual ones, and perhaps something older that cannot be written down. In the late 1950s, engineers brought ground scanning equipment to Rosslyn to study the foundation. What they found made everyone uneasy. The readings showed empty space beneath the floor, not one chamber but several, aligned in perfect symmetry under the chapel's eastern end. Yet, when requests came to excavate, they were quietly denied. The Sinclair family, descendants of the chapel's founder, refused to grant permission. Officially, the reason was preservation. The chapel was fragile, they said. Any digging could cause damage. But the way they spoke, always with respect and a trace of fear, made it clear the real reason ran deeper. They weren't protecting the chapel from the world. They were protecting the world from whatever was beneath it. Legends about the vault began almost as soon as Rosslyn was built in 1446. Some claimed it was the final resting place of the Knights Templar, who fled France in 1307 and found sanctuary with the Sinclairs. Others whispered that the vault held the lost treasure of Jerusalem, relics taken from Solomon's temple, or even documents proving the bloodline of Christ. Each theory burned bright and faded, but the vault itself never spoke. It remained sealed, perfect in its refusal. Those who have studied Rosslyn know how deliberate its design is. Every stone has purpose. Every carving has reason. The placement of the vault was not accidental. It sits directly beneath the heart of the chapel, the point where light from the morning sun crosses the altar at midsummer. That alignment matters. Some believe the vault is not meant to be opened until that light reveals its door. Others think it was never meant to open at all, that it serves as a vessel, not for objects but for knowledge, encoded in its geometry. When radar scanning was attempted again in the late 20th century, officials found anomalies that even modern instruments could not explain. Pockets of dense metal, areas where sound refused to echo, an interior architecture that did not match the layout above. And then suddenly, all research stopped. The files were sealed. The equipment was removed. A polite statement was issued, saying further study was unnecessary. Since then, no one has tried again. The vault waits, patient as stone, beneath tourists and candles and the slow hum of prayer. Some nights, when the chapel is empty and the last light fades through the stained glass, caretakers claim they hear faint sounds rising from below. Not movement, not voice. Something softer, like wind through a hollow. Whether it is imagination or memory, no one can say. But one thing is certain. Whatever sleeps beneath Rosslyn does not want to be disturbed. In the quiet countryside of Midlothian lies a small parish with a name that feels out of place. Temple. The word lingers like a secret on the map, too grand for the cluster of cottages and winding roads that surround it. But centuries ago, this place was far more than a village. It was the heart of the Templar presence in Scotland, known once as Ballantradock, the seat of their commandery. Today only fragments remain, half buried in soil and memory. A few stones stand in the grass, carved with faint crosses worn smooth by rain. The river South Esk winds nearby, and locals say that at night the water sometimes carries whispers, like chanting carried on the wind. The Templars built their commanderies with precision, always near running water, always aligned with the stars. Ballantradock was no different. It served as a spiritual and logistical hub, connecting outposts across the Scottish lowlands. Documents from the 14th century mention it briefly, but most of those records end abruptly, as if someone wanted the name forgotten. After the Templar Order was dissolved in 1307, Their lands were officially handed to the Knights Hospitaller, yet Ballantradoc seemed to slip through the cracks. The transfer papers mention it once and never again. It is as if the land simply disappeared. Over the years, scholars and wanderers have searched the area, piecing together the scattered ruins and symbols carved into boundary stones. What they found was strange. When mapped, the remaining fragments form a geometric pattern that aligns with Rosslyn Chapel to the north and the old Hospitaller site at Torfichen to the west. 3 points forming a triangle across the Scottish heartland. Some believe this is coincidence. Others think it was intentional, a map hidden in plain sight, drawn not on parchment but across the earth itself. Legends say that the Templars used this pattern as a code, marking safe routes, secret stores, or even sacred ground. Some claim Ballantradoc was the centre point of this geometry, the place where messages and relics were once exchanged under cover of prayer. A few explorers claim to have unearthed stone slabs etched with faint symbols, serpents entwined, suns divided into 8 rays, and what looked like a map within a map. None of these artifacts ever reached museums. They vanish as quickly as they appear, often into private hands. The villagers speak of strange visitors who come at dusk with metal detectors and leave before dawn. Every few years, someone claims to have found the entrance to a tunnel system beneath the fields, but no entrance stays open for long. Earth collapses, water floods, or permissions are suddenly revoked. Still, the fascination endures. Ballantradoc may no longer be a commandery, but the ground remembers. Its name alone is an act of defiance, a whisper from a vanished order refusing to fade completely. When the wind passes through Temple and the church bells toll in the distance, it feels as if something ancient still lingers, not gone, just waiting for someone who knows how to read the land. The year was 1314. The fields of Bannockburn trembled beneath the weight of steel and hooves. Scotland stood on the edge of ruin, its people worn thin by years of war, its king, Robert the Bruce, defiant yet desperate. Facing him was the might of England, an army vast enough to crush a kingdom. The morning mist rolled across the battlefield, thick as smoke, and in that haze something happened that no chronicler could ever quite explain. The official histories of Bannockburn are clear enough. Bruce led his men with cunning, the English fell into chaos, and Scotland won its freedom against impossible odds. But there are pieces missing, pages that feel too clean. The victory was so complete, so sudden, that whispers began almost immediately. Whispers of riders, men in white, cloaked and silent, who appeared in the fog at the height of battle and turned the tide. Ballads sung in the years that followed told of these spectral knights who struck from nowhere, cutting through the English flank with precision and vanishing before the mist cleared. The church ignored the songs, the scribes avoided the tale, and yet the people remembered. They called them the Guardians, the White Brothers, or simply the Order. To this day, no one knows who they were, but the stories match too closely to be dismissed as invention. The descriptions fit a group thought to be long extinct, the Knights Templar. 7 years earlier, they had been hunted across Europe, their leaders executed, their order dissolved. Yet Scotland, excommunicated and outside papal reach, had become a quiet refuge for the survivors. If any Templars had indeed fled to these northern lands, Bannockburn would have been their chance to repay that sanctuary. Imagine it. Men who had once defended Jerusalem, now defending Stirling, wielding the same discipline, the same faith in secrecy, the same resolve born from persecution. Some accounts mention that Robert the Bruce's army carried no standard blessed by Rome, but a plain cross of red, the same symbol once worn by the Templars. In the chaos of the battle, that cross reappeared. Witnesses said it gleamed through the mist, as if lit from within. The English never recovered. When the sun finally broke through the haze, the battlefield was strewn with fallen armour, and the White Riders were gone. Only their impact remained. For the Church, this story was dangerous. If the Templars had indeed fought alongside Bruce, It meant the order was not destroyed but reborn, loyal not to Rome but to Scotland. Chroniclers were careful to erase the rumour, yet local legends refused to let it die. Even now, near the site of the battle, there are carvings of knights with blank shields, no heraldry, no name. In the quiet of evening, when fog curls over the ground, people claim they still see figures on horseback moving through the mist, armour glinting faintly. Whether they are ghosts or guardians, no one dares to say. But if the Templars truly rode at Bannockburn, then Scotland's freedom was not won by one king alone. It was sealed by a brotherhood history tried to erase. In the heart of West Lothian lies Torfichan, a quiet village wrapped in fields and time. Most who pass through see only the remnants of an old preceptory, a few weathered stones, and the outline of an ancient courtyard. But 500 years ago, this was the headquarters of the Knights Hospitaller in Scotland, the order that rose from the ashes of the Templars. Or, so history claims. The Hospitallers were given the Templars' lands after their downfall in 1307, a gesture meant to erase one brotherhood by absorbing it into another. But at Torfichan, the story is not so clean. The records transfer property, yes, but they are too neat, too perfect, as if written to close a door that was never fully shut. Beneath the tidy paperwork lies a silence that feels deliberate. The preceptory at Torfichan is strange. Its chapel is marked by deep grooves in the stone where centuries of pilgrims once knelt and crossed themselves. The floor still bears the faint imprint of circular steps, worn by rituals no one can fully explain. A great stone cross stands outside, its arms chipped, its edges carved with strange lines that resemble compass marks rather than scripture. Some say it was used to measure the sun's shadow, an ancient method of aligning sacred sites. Others believe it was a symbol of direction, a signpost for those who travelled under vows of secrecy. The Hospitallers claimed this place as their seat, but the symbols here predate their rule. The architecture blends Roman, Celtic, and distinctly Templar design. The chapel's inner walls face true east, matching not the pattern of other Hospitaller sites, but that of older commanderies like Ballantrodoc. It is as if the men who built here remembered a different allegiance, one that survived quietly beneath the black cloak of the new order. Local legend tells of a sealed chamber beneath the preceptory, similar to the vault at Rosslyn, said to hold relics too powerful or too sacred to reveal. When workmen attempted to dig there in the 18th century, the ground collapsed, swallowing their tools in an instant. The excavation was never continued. Since then, the earth has remained undisturbed. Nearby, roads from Stirling, Edinburgh, and Linlithgow converge on Torfichan, meeting at the foot of that great cross. It is said the Templars chose their sites where paths of power met, both earthly and unseen. The crossroads here may have been one such place. At dawn, when light strikes the arms of the stone, the shadow points toward Rosslyn. Coincidence, perhaps, but a curious one. The written history of Torfichan ends politely. The Hospitallers managed the lands, kept the peace, and faded after the Reformation. But the Whispers tell another story, of men who wore both red crosses and black cloaks, of rituals performed in secret, of a torch passed quietly from one brotherhood to the next. The paper trail may have ended, but the stones at Torfichan still speak, and what they say is clear. The line between Templar and Hospitaller was not a wall, it was a veil. Far to the north, where the sea bites at the cliffs and the wind speaks in an ancient tongue, stands the town of Kirkwall in Orkney. It is a place of stone and salt, a crossroads between worlds, where Norse legend meets Celtic myth and whispers of the Templars drift like sea fog. Hidden within its history lies one of the most mysterious artefacts in Scotland, the Kirkwall Scroll. To most, it looks like a simple roll of painted canvas. But to those who study it, it is a map, a code, and a confession all at once. The scroll first surfaced in the 18th century within a Masonic lodge in Kirkwall. The members claimed it had been preserved for generations, its origins unknown, its symbols older than their own order. When unrolled, the scroll stretches over 18 feet, covered in intricate drawings of temples, ships, angels, stars, and strange inscriptions that seem half biblical, half cryptic. No one agrees on when it was made. Some date it to the early 1600s, others to the late 1400s. A few believe it is far older, a relic carried from the time of the Templars themselves. Its most striking feature is the sequence of ships sailing across a painted sea, their sails marked with red crosses. The vessels follow a winding route that leads past the Mediterranean, through strange lands, and north into waters that seem to leap off the edge of known maps. To where, no one can say. Some think it marks the journey of the Templar fleet that vanished from La Rochelle in 1307. Others think it shows a path of initiation, a spiritual voyage hidden behind symbols. Alongside the ships are towers, pyramids, suns, and seven-pointed stars. Each image feels intentional, as if the artist was trying to tell a story too dangerous to write in words. Near the end of the scroll, a fortress stands on an island beneath a radiant cross, and beneath it, in faint lettering, a phrase that translates roughly to Sanctuary of the North. That phrase has haunted historians for centuries. What sanctuary, and why here, at the edge of the known world? Kirkwall itself was once a centre of trade and pilgrimage, a place where the currents of Europe converged. The Sinclairs, lords of Orkney, were known patrons of architecture and mystic art. Some believe the scroll was commissioned by them, meant to preserve the lineage of sacred knowledge carried from Rosslyn and Ballintrodoc. Within the lodge where it was found, the scroll was used in rituals that spoke of a lost order of knights, one that had crossed the sea and survived in secrecy. Skeptics call it coincidence, a later creation inspired by myth. But those who have seen the scroll in person say its age can be felt in the paint, in the smell of salt and time woven into the fabric. It hums with the same quiet defiance found in every Templar relic, as if reminding the world that the order never truly vanished. It simply changed its sails. Henry Sinclair was not a man who believed in endings. In the late 14th century, when the world still thought the ocean fell into darkness beyond the horizon, he looked west and saw possibility. As Earl of Orkney and Lord of Rosslyn, Sinclair ruled from the edge of the known world. His lands stretched across wind-carved islands, where Norse sagas mixed with whispers of an older code, one that spoke of hidden knowledge, lost lands, and voyages meant to carry truth rather than trade. Some said he inherited his restlessness from the Templars, who had once found sanctuary under his family's roof. Others believed he carried something older in his blood, a duty to keep a secret alive. What we know is this. Around the year 1398, Henry Sinclair is said to have led an expedition from Scotland across the Atlantic Ocean nearly a century before Columbus. The records are sparse, the evidence debated, but the legend endures. A Venetian sailor named Antonio Zeno wrote letters claiming to have served under Sinclair on a voyage westward. The letters describe cold seas, strange coastlines, and a land rich with forests and rivers, which some later called Nova Scotia. Whether these letters were truth or fiction has never been settled, but the pieces around them fit too well to ignore. Sinclair had shipwrights from Norway, navigators from the north, and access to maps few others could read. His family crest bore the cross of the Templars. And in Rosslyn Chapel, carvings of maize and aloe, plants from the Americas, appear long before Europe knew they existed. Coincidence, perhaps, but it paints a picture hard to dismiss. The story says Sinclair sailed not for conquest, but for contact, following a map encoded in the Kirkwall scroll, a chart that showed routes beyond the edge of familiar waters. He sought something lost, maybe the remnants of a Templar fleet, maybe a sanctuary for a brotherhood that no longer had a home. The voyage was perilous. The Atlantic was not a sea of trade routes then, but of myths and monsters. Yet Sinclair was no fool. He studied currents, the pull of tides, and the direction of migratory birds. He trusted the same mathematics and geometry that built Rosslyn itself. believing that what was true in stone was true in stars. Some accounts claim he reached the shores of North America, building temporary settlements before returning east. Others say he never returned at all, buried in a land that history would not rediscover for another 100 years. The truth remains adrift between pages of forgotten journals and family lore passed down in whispers. But what cannot be denied is the persistence of the story. Every generation of the Sinclair line has guarded it like a sacred inheritance, half myth, half memory. And perhaps that is the point. The voyage was never just about geography. It was about continuity, about carrying a fire that refused to drown, a legacy that used the sea as its sanctuary. Whether Henry Sinclair reached a new world or not, the current he set in motion still flows. Across the heart of Scotland, the land seems to hum with patterns invisible to the untrained eye. From Rosslyn Chapel to the village of Temple, and onward to the ancient stronghold of Stirling, the hills and rivers form lines that feel too deliberate to be chance. Some call them ley lines, paths of unseen energy that link sacred sites across the earth. Others see them as the quiet signature of medieval builders who used geometry as a language of faith. Either way, the alignment is impossible to ignore. When you trace the route between these 3 points on a modern map, a perfect triangle emerges, each corner anchored by a site steeped in Templar legend. Rosslyn to the north, Temple to the east, and Stirling to the west. Scholars call it coincidence, mystics call it design. But anyone who has walked the land knows it feels intentional, as if the builders of these places were not just raising walls but composing a message that could only be read from the sky. Medieval architects believed that harmony between heaven and earth was not metaphor but fact. The stars above were mirrored by structures below, each church and chapel a reflection of a constellation. At Rosslyn, the carvings inside the chapel align with the pattern of the constellation Cygnus, the swan, a symbol of transformation and divine flight. When extended outward, those same alignments point directly toward Temple and Stirling, as though the buildings themselves were part of a celestial map drawn in stone. In ancient times, travellers marked their way across the land, not with written signs, but with standing stones and crosses. Many of these still dot the hills between these sites, their placements matching the angles found in sacred geometry. Circles, triangles, and spirals repeat across the landscape, echoing the same motifs carved into Rosslyn's pillars and arches. It is as if the land was used as parchment, the masons writing in a code that could only be seen when viewed from above. The idea of ley lines gained new attention in the 20th century when researchers noticed that many old pilgrimage routes followed straight paths connecting ancient religious centres. But here in Scotland, those paths lead through sites once linked to the Templars. If they were using geometry to hide or protect something, the pattern may be part of that design. Perhaps these lines were markers of power, or perhaps they were simply reminders that the divine could be mapped, measured, and built into the very earth. Some modern surveyors have used satellite imaging to study these alignments, finding that sunrise and sunset at certain points in the year cast light along exact axes between Rosslyn and Temple. On midsummer morning, sunlight passes through Rosslyn's eastern window and travels the same bearing as the line towards Stirling. It is a moment when earth and sky seem to speak the same language. Maybe it is coincidence. Maybe it is something more. But as you stand in those fields and feel the stillness beneath your feet, you realize the geometry is not just under the ground. It is alive within it, pulsing quietly like the heartbeat of history. In Scotland, symbols speak louder than words. Every crest, every carving, every thread of tartan carries meaning shaped by centuries of memory. Among these emblems, two stand out, the bee and the thistle. One represents work and harmony, the other defence and endurance. Together, they tell a story older than Scotland itself. The thistle is easy to explain. It became the national symbol after legend claimed that its spines once warned sleeping Scots of an approaching enemy. But the bee is quieter, more secretive, and its meaning has long been debated. To most, it represents diligence, community, and creation. Yet in older lore, it carried far deeper significance. The bee was sacred to ancient kings, a mark of divine right and resurrection. In France, golden bees were found buried with Merovingian rulers, symbols of immortality and royal blood. Those same bees reappeared centuries later in Scottish heraldry and trade guilds. How did an emblem of vanished kings cross the sea and take root here? The answer may lie with the Sinclairs and the Templars who once found refuge under their protection. The bee was among the secret symbols of the order, appearing in carvings, manuscripts, and seals. It represented not just labour but enlightenment, the gathering of wisdom from many sources, the transformation of chaos into sweetness. When the Templars fled France in 1307, their ships may have carried more than treasure. They may have carried symbols that would survive through art and craft, rather than crown and creed. In medieval Scotland, bees began to appear in unexpected places, on clan banners, in church carvings, even on tools used by stonemasons. These were not random decorations. They were marks of identity, signs that certain families and guilds preserved old knowledge under new names. The connection to the thistle made the pairing complete. The thistle protected, the bee created. One defended the land, the other sustained it. Together, they formed a quiet code of survival. During the Renaissance, this dual symbol became central to Scottish identity. The bee appeared on royal embroidery, silver coins, and in architectural details across Edinburgh. In the records of craft guilds, particularly the masons, it stood for unity, a reminder that every worker contributed to the whole. But beneath the surface, it whispered of something older, a lineage that stretched back to sacred monarchs and buried dynasties. Even today, in the design of Scottish regalia, bees appear tucked into patterns beside thistles. Most people never notice them, but they are there, small golden reminders of a forgotten inheritance. In folklore, it is said that bees never truly die. Their spirits linger, guiding those who listen. Perhaps that is why their symbol has lasted so long, surviving war, reformation, and empire. The bee endures because it hides in plain sight, woven into the fabric of identity, and the thistle stands beside it, a thorny guardian, ensuring the secret remains safe. Two small symbols, one gentle, one fierce, bound together by history and meaning. The bee and the thistle, the creators and the protectors of Scotland's hidden legacy. Melrose Abbey rises from the borderlands like a ghost of devotion, its arches open to the sky, its stones stained by centuries of rain and reverence. Founded in the 12th century by Cistercian monks, it was once a sanctuary of silence and song. Now it stands as a ruin, but the air still feels heavy, as if something sacred remains buried beneath the grass. Among the carvings and crumbling pillars are graves unlike any others. Some bear faint crosses on their lids, not the usual Latin form but the flared cross of the Templars. Time has worn them smooth, but the shape lingers, as though refusing to fade. The abbey was said to have sheltered more than monks. Records hint that after the fall of the Templars in 1307, riders cloaked in white were seen travelling through the borders at night, escorted into Melrose by the abbot himself. No one ever recorded their names. What they carried has been a matter of speculation for centuries. Beneath one of the chapels lies a sealed reliquary discovered during partial excavations in the 19th century. Inside were fragments of bone, a vial of hardened resin, and a small lump of beeswax carved with a symbol resembling intertwined circles. The wax was pure and still faintly scented with honey, preserved beyond reason. Historians dismissed it as a votive offering, but others saw it differently. Beeswax was sacred to the Templars. They used it to seal their documents, anoint relics, and preserve bodies. It symbolized purity and endurance, the transformation of labor into light. Finding it buried beside human remains felt less like ritual and more like a message. Melrose also holds another mystery, the heart of Robert the Bruce. His body lies in Dunfermline, but his heart, encased in silver, was buried here in 1329 after a failed crusade. The connection between Bruce and the Templars has long been debated. If they truly aided him at Bannockburn, then the placement of his heart among Templar graves cannot be coincidence. Perhaps it was a gesture of gratitude, or perhaps it marked an unspoken bond. When archaeologists reopened the Heart Tomb in the late 20th century, they found traces of resin and oil consistent with Templar embalming rituals. It seems even in death, the echoes of that order lingered. The abbey's layout, too, holds clues. Its proportions mirror the geometry of Solomon's Temple, the same blueprint the Templars once revered. Bees are carved into the corners of certain stones, nearly invisible unless caught by sunlight at the right angle. The masons who built Melrose left their signatures in symbols, not names. Circles, hammers, stars, and occasionally the bee. It was as if the building itself was meant to hum with meaning, long after voices fell silent. Walk through Melrose today, and the stillness feels charged. The scent of wildflowers mixes with the faint sweetness of old wax that seems to cling to the air. The graves whisper of vows taken in secret and kept even in death. Wax, bone, oil, and oath, the ingredients of a hidden ritual that still binds this place in silence. In the town of Kilwinning, tucked away on Scotland's western coast, stands the ruins of an abbey older than most cities in the country. Its stones are weathered, but the ground it sits on hums with quiet power. Locals call it the birthplace of Freemasonry, the mother lodge of the world. To outsiders, it is just another chapter in Scotland's long architectural history. To those who listen, it is the place where the old craft met the new, where builders of stone became keepers of stories too dangerous to write. The earliest records of the Kilwinning Lodge date back to the late 16th century, but its traditions reach much further, back to the age of the operative masons who carved cathedrals and abbeys across medieval Europe. These masons were more than craftsmen. They were mathematicians, artists, and philosophers who understood geometry not as science, but as scripture. The abbey at Kilwinning was their sanctuary, a place where their guild gathered to share secrets of measurement and proportion. Yet, somewhere between the fall of the Templars in 1307 and the birth of Freemasonry 3 centuries later, something shifted. The practical became mystical, the blueprint became allegory. The Masons began to speak not only of stone, but of spirit. Historians call this transition the birth of speculative masonry, a transformation that turned builders into philosophers and their lodges into vaults of hidden truth. Legends say that the surviving Templars, fleeing persecution in France, found allies among these Scottish masons. Both groups spoke a language of symbols. Both understood that sacred knowledge could be disguised as simple craft. The Templars carried their rituals and codes, and the Masons wove them into their own traditions. Kilwinning became the bridge between them, the point where geometry became ritual and secrecy became survival. Inside the old abbey, carvings still remain that do not belong to the Cistercian style. They show compasses, stars, bees, and twin pillars marked with letters that later became central to Masonic lore. The Masons who worked there claimed descent from builders of Solomon's Temple, but those who knew whispered that their real inheritance came from knights who once guarded it. The rituals performed at Kilwinning were cloaked in allegory. Words spoken about light and darkness carried echoes of an older battle between ignorance and revelation. The initiations mirrored Templar oaths of loyalty and silence. Even the tools of the trade, the square and compass, held double meanings, reminders that truth must be balanced, measured, and concealed. Over time, these ceremonies spread, carried by travellers and scholars who called themselves brothers of the craft. Yet Kilwinning remained their origin, the place where the line between myth and memory blurred. The Mother Lodge still stands today, rebuilt but never ordinary. Members gather under the same starry symbols, repeating rituals that have survived wars and reformations. They say the stones remember, that the air hums when the old words are spoken. Whether you believe the Templars walked here or not, Kilwinning remains a doorway between worlds, where the language of builders became the scripture of seekers, and the tools of labour became keys to a hidden faith. Off the western coast of Scotland, surrounded by restless water and quiet light, lies the island of Iona. It is small, barely 3 miles long, yet it holds a gravity that defies its size. For more than 1,000 years, people have come here seeking peace, truth, and sometimes forgiveness. Its beaches shimmer with white shell sand, its air smells of salt and moss, and its silence feels ancient. This is where St. Columba landed in the year 563, bringing Christianity to the wild north. But long before the monks built their cells, the island was already sacred. The stones beneath their feet were older than their prayers. The monks of Iona built their abbey with precision, arranging cells, chapels, and crosses in geometric harmony. Every doorway, every alignment of stone seemed to obey an invisible grammar, a spiritual logic that echoed something even older. They were not inventing a new pattern, but applying an ancient one, like a key being turned in a familiar lock. Some historians say the layout of Iona mirrors the design of earlier Druidic sanctuaries, where land and sky were measured by rhythm and number. Others see in it the same sacred geometry later found in Templar architecture, a belief that the divine could be revealed through proportion. The monks may not have known where their designs came from, but they felt their truth. When you walk the island today, the crosses carved from local stone still stand, their patterns filled with spirals, vines, and circles that seem to move even in stillness. Each carving feels like a message written in a language we have forgotten. The monks believed the cross was more than a symbol of faith. It was a map of creation, a balance of heaven and earth, time and eternity. The same belief would later appear in Templar chapels, carved into pillars and floors. Perhaps it was not borrowed but remembered, an echo of knowledge that never truly disappeared. Iona also became a burial place for kings, more than 40 of them according to legend, including early Scottish and Norse rulers. They chose this island not for its beauty, but because it was thought to be a threshold, a thin place between worlds. Even now, when the mist rolls in and the sea fades into sky, it feels like that boundary still exists. Some scholars have suggested that Iona served as a quiet sanctuary for those who held forbidden knowledge after the Templars fell in 1307. Its remoteness, its spiritual reputation, and its ancient design made it the perfect refuge. There are whispers of manuscripts hidden in stone chambers, of monks who guarded secrets too dangerous to name. Whether these stories are true or not, Iona remains a place where silence speaks. It teaches not through sermons but through structure, a grammar of space and light. Each stone is a word, each carving a phrase, and together they form a sentence that reaches across centuries. It is the same sentence the Templars once tried to preserve, the same truth that Rosslyn would later encode. On Iona, it is not shouted or carved into walls of power. It is whispered in the wind, quiet, patient, eternal. Far beyond the Scottish mainland, where the sea stretches cold and endless, the Shetland Islands rise from the mist like forgotten sentinels. The wind there carries stories older than memory, tales of ships that came in silence and left no record behind. These were not trading vessels or war fleets. They were something else, ships that moved like shadows between tides, using hidden inlets and secret coves as their harbours. Locals call them the Northern Ships, a phrase passed down through generations with no clear origin, but with a tone of reverence, as if speaking it too loudly might wake what still sleeps beneath the waves. The Shetlands were a natural way station for anyone sailing north from the mainland or west toward lands uncharted. The island's cliffs are carved with strange markings, low along the rocks where the tide rises and falls. Some resemble runes, Others look like geometric sigils, and a few are shaped like simple crosses enclosed in circles. Archaeologists call them Norse carvings. The locals call them signs of the builders, the ones who used the sea as a road. Old fishing families tell stories of seeing lights far out in the water. Not modern boats, but single flickers moving in formation, vanishing as the fog thickened. In older times, those who sailed these routes spoke of following invisible lines that guided them through the northern currents. They were not guided by stars alone, but by landmarks, carved stones, and symbols placed with exact precision. It is said the Templars knew these routes, using them to move between sanctuaries long after their order was declared extinct. From Orkney to Shetland, and from there to even farther isles, they followed the northern path, carrying relics, maps, and knowledge too dangerous for the mainland. The sea became their cloister, their floating monastery. Along the cliffs of Eshenes and Fitful Head, faint engravings can still be found, barely visible beneath layers of lichen and salt. Circles within circles, sun symbols, and what looks like the pattern of a compass rose. Centuries before compasses were known in this part of the world. Some say these were carved by monks. Others insist they were left by navigators who knew the secret geometry of the earth itself. In Shetland folklore, there are tales of the White Sail Brotherhood, men who would appear in times of need, helping ships lost in fog find their way to shore, then disappearing before thanks could be given. Their sails bore no crest, only a faint mark that looked like a red cross faded by salt. Whether they were ghosts, guardians, or sailors sworn to silence, no one can say. What is clear is that the northern seaways were more than routes of travel. They were corridors of transmission, carrying ideas and rituals between islands, like whispers over water. Even now, the sea remembers. On calm nights, the tide washes against the same carved stones, tracing patterns left by hands long gone. It is as if the ocean itself protects their message, erasing names but keeping meaning. The northern ships may be gone, but the silence they left behind still moves with the waves. By the time the 16th century dawned, Scotland was no longer the same land that had sheltered fugitive knights 200 years before. Yet beneath the shifting politics and new religions, something ancient was stirring again. The world was entering what scholars now call the occult renaissance, an age when science, mysticism, and heresy shared the same candlelight. And in Scotland, where old faiths and new ideas collided, the symbols of the Templars began to breathe again, reshaped under a new name, the Rosicrucians, the Rosy Cross. Their origins remain uncertain, but by the early 1600s, manuscripts began to circulate across Europe, claiming the existence of a secret brotherhood devoted to divine wisdom, healing, and transformation. To most people, these were myths, allegories wrapped in Latin prose. But to those who could read between the lines, the teachings sounded familiar. They spoke of hidden masters, of spiritual alchemy, of light encoded in geometry. It was as if the Templar flame had changed its colour, but not its purpose. In Scotland, Rosicrucian thought found fertile ground. The nation was caught between Reformation and rebellion, its universities filled with scholars fascinated by the Hermetic arts. Figures like Alexander Seton, the mysterious alchemist known as the Scots Adept, were rumoured to possess knowledge drawn from older, secret sources. Seton vanished under torture by the Inquisition, but stories say he survived, rescued by men who bore no crest except a single red rose carved into their rings. Around this time, the symbol of the Rosy Cross began to appear in stonework, hidden among church carvings and on tombs of families tied to the old craft. The rose represented enlightenment and rebirth, the cross discipline and sacrifice. Together, they formed a language of faith without dogma, of knowledge guarded but never lost. At Rosslyn Chapel, new carvings were added during later restorations, blending older Templar motifs with roses twined around crosses, symbols of the union between spirit and matter. Some believed these additions were the mark of descendants keeping the lineage alive. Others thought they were signs left by Rosicrucian masons who saw Rosslyn as sacred ground. The link between the two orders runs deeper than art. Both guarded secrets through symbols. Both believed wisdom should be earned, not given. And both used architecture as a form of scripture, where stone replaced parchment and the initiated could still read the message centuries later. In Edinburgh, circles of scholars and masons met under the guise of philosophical societies. They discussed astronomy, medicine, and geometry, but behind their polite language flowed an older current of Templar thought. The idea that enlightenment was not found through obedience, but through discovery. The Rosicrucians never claimed descent from the Templars, yet their imagery and philosophy carried the same pulse. In Scotland's sacred architecture, the two traditions merged quietly. The cross of sacrifice bloomed into the rose of understanding. The knights became scholars, the sword became the compass, and the secret remained, waiting for those who could still see the rosy cross carved in stone and understand that it was not decoration, but declaration, the symbol of a truth that refused to die. In the quiet corners of Scottish archives, there exist documents that hum with absence, parchments cracked with age, stamped with royal seals, signed by men whose names were once powerful but now mean little. They look ordinary enough to the untrained eye, lists of land transfers, payments, and forfeitures, the dull paperwork of governance. Yet between the lines of these records, something strange unfolds. Patterns emerge, estates forfeited under one name only to reappear under another, revenues redirected through obscure trusts. Seals that bear faint symbols, not of any clan or crown, but of the cross pate, the sign once worn by men who should not have existed anymore. The Templars may have been dissolved in 1307, but in these Scottish charters, written decades later, their shadow lingers. After the order's destruction in France, much of its wealth disappeared overnight. King Philip hunted gold and relics, but what he found were empty treasuries and vanished ledgers. In Scotland, similar vanishings occurred, though wrapped in politeness and procedure. A grant of land revoked, then quietly restored to a new steward, a fortress transferred for service to the realm, then left uninhabited for years. When read individually, these events mean nothing. But when strung together, they form a chain of silence, a hidden network of movement without traceable names. Legal parchment became camouflage. During the 14th and 15th centuries, Scotland's royal chancery was small, its records easily manipulated by those who understood their value. Clerks loyal to certain noble houses could ensure that a forfeiture document carried a hidden reversal clause, or that a charter's date was altered to suggest continuity where there was none. Through this system, wealth, land, and influence could pass invisibly from one generation to another under the guise of legality. Some scholars believe this network was used to preserve remnants of the Templar estate, hidden in plain sight through paperwork. A manor listed as belonging to a minor knight might in fact be serving as a holding for the same brotherhood that once sailed under the Red Cross. The proof lies not in what is written, but in how it is sealed. Certain charters bear seals with subtle deviations, crosses tilted, lines curved into circles, roses replacing lions. These are not errors of artistry, but signals of identity. To those initiated, they would have spoken volumes. To others, they were meaningless flourishes. And so the system endured, unchallenged, layered beneath the lawful surface of Scottish history. Even the language of these charters is peculiar. Repetitive, vague, and filled with phrases that echo earlier ecclesiastical documents, as if the scribes were copying from a much older template. They describe transactions in the name of God, the crown, and service to the light, phrases far too poetic for mere bureaucracy. Perhaps these clerks were not merely record keepers, but guardians of memory. Over time, the seals changed hands, their meanings diluted, but their purpose remained the same. to protect what must not be named, to ensure that the story of the Brotherhood would survive not in legend, but in law. Silent, binding, and almost invisible, these charters became their last sanctuary. The Rosslyn apprentice pillar rises silently in the centre of the chapel, carved from stone yet heavy with meaning. To most visitors, it is simply the tale of a young mason punished for jealousy, struck dead by the hand of a master, a story repeated in guidebooks and whispered in tour groups. But the pillar itself refuses to be read as a mere legend. Spirals curve along its length with precision that seems unnatural for a punishment story. The stone twists upward, botanical shapes etched with an intimacy that suggests more than casual observation. Leaves and vines interlace, some resembling plants from the eastern Mediterranean, ones unlikely to be known to Scottish masons of 1500. The craftsmanship hints at knowledge passed from distant lands, whispered through apprenticeships and carried across seas. Some historians argue that the pillar's design encodes information, a mnemonic device for builders trained in secret crafts. The spirals might map out proportions, ratios, or even astronomical positions, yet embedded within them is something else, a memory of movement, of hands that worked not only stone, but ideas imported from Jerusalem, from Acre, from lands touched by the Templars, before the fall in 1307. Each twist and curve invites a closer look. It suggests that the apprentice, far from being a foolish youth, may have been an initiator in training, a vessel for knowledge that could not be written down openly. The story of his death, whether allegorical or true, masks a deeper lesson, a ritual encoding of heritage into form. The pillar is not alone in speaking. Other carvings nearby echo the same forms, subtle repetitions, hidden in corners or on ceilings where only the observant would notice. Flowers, spirals, and stars recur in patterns that suggest memory passed from generation to generation, a silent continuity maintained under the guise of decorative flourish. Even the chapel's overall layout supports this reading. Pillars line the nave in sequences that mirror the starry sky, and the apprentice pillar stands at a point of convergence. Here, geometry and story meet. The tale of jealousy may simply be a cover, a narrative designed to distract the casual observer from the technical and symbolic knowledge encoded in stone. Visitors may not notice that the spiral echoes the shape of a vine, or that its proportions mirror those found in ancient texts describing sacred construction. Some researchers suggest the pillar served as a teaching tool. Each turn instructs on craft, on harmony, on memory. It preserves knowledge that was otherwise suppressed after the dissolution of the Templars and the absorption of their wisdom into the Sinclair family tradition. And so the apprentice pillar remains, a silent tutor, a stone shadow of apprentices past. It whispers of travel, of secrecy, of a knowledge too dangerous to speak aloud. The pillar asks the visitor to pause, to trace its spirals with their eyes, and to wonder what secrets a young mason may have carried across the seas. Every curve is deliberate, every detail a message. Here, in stone, is the echo of an ancient craft and the shadow of the bloodline it may have sought to protect. The story of the Sinclairs does not end on the rugged cliffs of Scotland. Across the Atlantic, a faint echo persists, a whisper of voyages undertaken long before they became legend. Henry Sinclair, the Earl of Orkney, is said to have sailed west in the year 1398, his ships cutting through icy waters with purpose, carrying not only men and provisions but knowledge, maps, and possibly sacred artifacts meant to be preserved. In the New World, fragments of his journey survive, hidden in carvings on wooden beams, faint lines in hand-drawn charts, and local lore passed down quietly by families who may have never realized their connection to the Templar legacy. The coastlines of Nova Scotia and beyond become waypoints in a journey that mirrors old seaways in the North Atlantic. Settlements rise, temporary shelters built on promontories and inlets, where the waves themselves seem to guard the memory of arrivals. Symbols appear in architecture, in subtle echoes of Scottish craftsmanship carried across the ocean, from spiraled pillars to small bees etched into doorframes and windows. These motifs are easy to dismiss, yet they appear repeatedly, stitched into buildings, hidden in plain sight. The Atlantic acts as a corridor, not only of water, but of ideas, carrying fragments of old knowledge that must remain secret until the time was right. Some maps show unusual alignments, points connected across the sea that suggest the hand of someone trained in both geometry and secrecy, someone who knew the value of encoding direction and memory into design. The stories reach New England and Massachusetts, where family Bibles contain marginal notes in Latin, referring to royal blood and an anointed line, the phrases so brief they might escape casual reading, yet heavy with implication. In the quiet towns, old estates hold heirlooms bearing symbols resembling those at Rosslyn Chapel, the twin motifs of bees and roses echoing centuries later. Even the landscape seems inscribed, stone fences and boundaries following routes that hint at forgotten waypoints, as if the New World itself is a coded extension of old European lines of power and secrecy. Some historians dismiss these signs as coincidence, yet the repetition is striking. Oral histories persist, legends of travellers arriving under cover of night, bringing letters, parchments, and relics from a distant homeland. The Atlantic itself becomes a repository, a place where the Scottish thesis of bloodline and guardianship meets a New World footnote. Here, the Templar line, the Sinclair custodianship, and the legacy of secret knowledge converge, hinting that the story never fully left Europe, but instead adapted, reshaped by geography and distance. It is a cautious trail, marked by partial evidence, whispers of maps lost or obscured, and symbols repeated across centuries and oceans. The American line is quiet, almost invisible, yet persistent, carrying forward a narrative begun in stone and sea. It suggests that the legacy is less about conquest and more about survival, preservation, and the subtle, patient transmission of memory. In tracing the Atlantic path of the Sinclairs, one begins to see that the story of Scotland does not end on the high cliffs. It flows onward, across waves, into a continent, still young in history yet old in secrets, where the echoes of Templar corridors, Sinclair voyages, and bloodline guardianship leave traces for those willing to follow. The uncatalogued archive is not a single place, but a scattered labyrinth. Private family papers line attic shelves, wrapped in faded cloth or tucked into iron-bound boxes whose locks have long resisted casual curiosity. The bindings are brittle, ink faded, yet the presence of careful hands is evident in each margin note, each flourish, each deliberate omission. Lodge minutes from the 18th century record gatherings in cryptic shorthand, the names of attendees often obscured by symbols or initials that only insiders might decode. Every entry seems ordinary, until you notice the gaps, the pages never bound, the leaves missing entirely. In Kirk session books, the hand of careful record-keeping alternates with erasure, a subtle deletion of deeds, donations, and agreements that hint at a hidden pattern. One name appears, then vanishes, another lineage referenced, but without context, a vital connection left unrecorded. Scholars visiting these places find themselves tracing shadows, following threads that lead nowhere yet feel purposeful. Each absence is heavy with implication, a fingerprint pressed into history by deliberate intent. A parchment in Aberdeenshire, for example, mentions a donation by a family bearing a familiar crest, only for the next leaf to be gone, torn, or removed, leaving a question impossible to answer. A chest in Rossshire holds correspondence spanning from the mid-17th century, letters written in Latin and Old Scots, discussions of property, spiritual patronage, and travel, yet the last pages in each bundle are mysteriously absent. It is as if someone understood that the story was too dangerous to leave intact. The physical voids speak louder than words. Marginalia in these books show repeated references to symbols of bees, roses, and crosses, sometimes underlined, sometimes circled, often without explanation, as if the scribe knew the significance, but recorded it for eyes that would appear centuries later. These traces are scattered across the Scottish lowlands, Highlands, and Islands, forming a quiet network of secrecy. Each time a researcher discovers a missing page, a coded line, a name replaced by a symbol, the puzzle gains dimension and intensity. The fingerprints of those who curated, erased, and preserved simultaneously are everywhere. They tell us that the legacy in question was never abandoned, only carefully obscured. Even today, descendants maintain family Bibles with notes in fading ink, reference to lands and contracts. Yet the story remains elusive. It is a delicate balance, a dance between concealment and preservation. The archive is alive, not in the sense of dustless efficiency, but in its ability to speak in silence. Anyone following these threads must learn to read absence as presence, erasure as statement, and margin as map. The decisive page is always missing, yet its shadow haunts the remaining leaves. It is this delicate interplay between what survives and what does not that sustains the tension, that whispers of a past carefully curated, hidden, and encoded, waiting for the patient, the observant, the willing to see beyond the obvious. In the archive of the uncatalogued, the story persists not in what is written, but in what is carefully left out, each omission a guidepost for the determined, a signal that the line of guardianship endures. The digital age has changed everything. Ancient abbeys, castles, and forgotten lodges that once required months of travel and careful negotiation to access are now being rendered into bytes and pixels. Rosslyn, Kirkwall, Temple, and Melrose have been scanned, photographed, and catalogued, their registers digitized into sprawling databases that can be combed by anyone with access. At first glance, the data appears chaotic, a mixture of property records, clerical notes, and genealogical entries. But when modern algorithms begin to map names, dates, and locations, patterns emerge, lines connecting the abbeys, like threads in a tapestry, too vast for the human eye to trace alone. Connections that once seemed coincidental now pulse with a rhythm, suggesting roots, familial ties, and a network of custodians. Some researchers have begun to whisper about the web that forms, a lattice spanning centuries and hundreds of miles. The algorithm does not care for legend or skepticism. It does not distinguish between pious record-keeping and hidden messages. It sees only sequences, repetitions, and anomalies. A name recurring in Melrose appears again in Temple, then in Rosslyn, each time connected with seemingly mundane transactions, yet when plotted against centuries-old maps, they draw lines that intersect at key historical sites. The coincidences become too neat to be random, yet too ragged to be fraud. Even more startling, some of the patterns correspond to celestial events. Solstices, equinoxes, and eclipses align with the timestamps of recorded events. Researchers pause, realizing that the digital translation of these registers might have preserved a coded map that was never meant to be read by ordinary eyes. The algorithm uncovers clusters of symbols, marginal notes that reference bees, roses, and crosses, each one recurring at predictable intervals and in predictable locations. Could these have been early cryptographers, centuries before the term existed, encoding their custodial work into the records of the abbeys? Every anomaly leads to another. A family in Kirkwall shows up as benefactors in Melrose, yet there is no record of travel or communication, only the faint trail of land transfers, donations, and religious obligations. The patterns hint at more than administrative oversight. They hint at intention, a deliberate network maintained over generations, now rendered visible through the neutral lens of computation. Some historians caution against reading too much into numbers and coincidences. Yet when the web is visualized, lines radiate like a constellation, linking abbeys, lodges, and coastal way stations with a clarity that demands attention. It is as if the past has been quietly digitized to speak across centuries. And the more the algorithm digs, the more it seems that a story emerges, one of careful preservation, encoded knowledge, and guardianship hidden in plain sight. The abbeys and lodges may be stone and mortar, but through this modern lens, they are nodes in a living network. Each digital trace carries a shadow of intention, a whisper of custodianship that spans Rosslyn, Kirkwall, Temple, and Melrose. And for the first time, someone listening carefully might begin to hear it. The treasure the Templars carried was never silver or gold. It was not a cup or a gem to be displayed on a table. What they guarded was far subtler, far more dangerous. It was knowledge. A corpus of rites, roots, and names, a living map of sacred continuity hidden beneath layers of ordinary life. Every abbey they built, every chapel they consecrated, every ledger they kept, was a node in this network, a vessel for memory. The ritual of the Mass, the way stones were carved, the placement of pillars, the inscriptions on walls, all contained pieces of a code, a method to preserve what could not survive openly. In France, when Philip the Fair moved against them in 1307, the knights did not scatter with silver alone. They carried the essence of their purpose, encoded in parchments, in oral instruction, in precise gestures that would outlast the fire and the sword. They moved quietly north through Scotland, leaving traces in Rosslyn, in Ballintrodoc, and even in the remote islands of Orkney and Shetland. Each mark, each line, each stone is not merely decoration but memory, made tangible, a breadcrumb trail for those who could read it. What was guarded was not a physical grail, but a living system. Names of those who carried it, genealogies that mapped descent, pilgrimages that reinforced connection, rituals that encoded knowledge. All of this had to be hidden under hostile eyes, beneath crowns that would kill for what they could not understand, beneath the watchful gaze of kings, popes, and inquisitors. And yet, it survived. The Templars knew that secrecy was not just protection, but survival. The corpus was like water. It flowed through generations, sometimes visible in symbols, sometimes hidden in memory, always adapting, always moving. In Rosslyn, the carvings of angels, plants, and geometric shapes are not random. In Melrose, the placement of tombs and reliquaries speaks of orders within orders. Even the seemingly mundane acts of donations, of lands granted or sold, were part of a ledger of legacy, a way to keep the network alive without drawing attention. The essence of what was guarded was endurance. It was the assurance that sacred things, ideas, and lines of descent could persist beyond the reach of violence or suppression. And through it all, the knights, their successors, and the families they protected passed knowledge quietly, often without ever speaking it aloud. Today, we glimpse these traces in the bee motifs stitched into tapestries, in roses carved into stone, in lines of sight connecting abbeys to natural landmarks, in family records tucked away in country manors. The Templars' legacy was not buried, it was woven, encoded, alive. And to understand it, one must see beyond objects to patterns, beyond dates to sequences, beyond names to networks. What was guarded was not something to be owned. It was something to be carried, preserved, and recognized when the world was ready. It was the method of survival itself, and it waits still, in stone, in memory, and in the subtle architecture of a sacred, hidden history. The sun is falling behind the Scottish hills, casting long shadows across the heather and moss that cling to the slopes around Rosslyn. The chapel stands silent, its carvings sharp in the fading light. Angels frozen in stone, plants curled in impossible precision, spirals and stars that have watched centuries pass. Beneath the grass, under the worn stones, the earth holds a secret it has carried for generations. A door, not made of wood or iron, but a threshold in memory, in placement, in pattern. It is a portal not to treasure, not to gold, but to the story of those who walked before, the Templars, the Sinclairs, the guardians of knowledge that dared not speak its name aloud. Walk slowly along the path that leads to the old foundations. The wind carries the smell of damp stone and moss, the faint tang of candle smoke long extinguished. Each footstep presses against centuries, pressing into the same rhythm that has kept the secret alive. Look closely at the angles, the lines, the way the chapel aligns with the rising sun on solstices, the way the hills form natural sightlines to hidden waystations and islands. It is as though the landscape itself is a cipher, each contour a letter, each ridge a phrase, each glen a sentence. History whispers here in silence. You feel the weight of what has been protected, the careful orchestration of rites, of roots, of names passed in shadows, carried on wind, etched in stone, whispered by monks, by masons, by those who knew that revelation could be deadly. The door in the hill is not open, yet it is present. Its hinge is time, its key is observation, its threshold is awareness. You do not step through it with hands, you step through it with eyes and memory and wonder. And as dusk deepens, the shadows of the angels grow long across the stones, the bees carved into capitals catch the last light, golden in the gloom, a pulse of continuity that refuses to fade. You trace a line with your finger over a carving, imagining the fingers that touched it centuries ago, imagining the secrets conveyed without a word, imagining the knowledge that was safeguarded against fire and tyranny. It waits here still, in patterns, in glyphs, in geometry. Outside, the heather sways. A bird calls somewhere beyond the ridge. The world moves on, yet the legacy remains fixed, embedded in place, in thought, in memory. The Templars, the Sinclairs, the Masons, the families who preserved what could not be written, they are part of the hill now. Their watch continues silently, patiently. And perhaps the most astonishing thing is this: the door is also within you. In curiosity, in questioning, in the act of seeing and remembering, you carry the threshold forward. Rosslyn is not merely a site, it is a living instruction, a demonstration that secrets can survive without being fully revealed, that knowledge can endure in pattern and gesture. The last light slips behind the hills. Shadows grow dense. The chapel breathes in the twilight. And as you step back, the grass whispering underfoot, you realize the door has always been here, waiting, encrypted in place, and now also in the mind, in the act of seeing, in the heartbeat of remembrance. The story has not ended, it continues.